Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to be... this is silly, let's just skip the formalities. It's the Unversed. We're going to be looking at the Unversed. I'm going to be looking at every Unversed design in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, comparing the original colours and the final mix colours. This is actually the last video I'm going to do like this because it's the last Kingdom Hearts game that got a final mix and it got recoloured enemies. So here we are with the Discount Heartless. I quite often do like to refer to these guys as that, but maybe that's a little harsh. I think there are actually some really interesting designs here, especially what they do with the eyes and the emotions that are represented by these guys. But of course, like the Heartless, they did get some recolours. We're going to see these recolours now, although I will say in advance, I only played the final mix version of this game a year ago. I've never played the original, so I don't really have much nostalgia or anything like that for the old colours. So if you wanted something that was maybe less biased, this would probably be it. However, I'm going to say that I don't think I was that biased about the Heartless. I think, really, I just thought a lot of the recolours were worse because they didn't match very well and there was too many clashing colours and stuff like that. But some people were like, oh, you're just biased for the old colours. I don't agree with that, but hey, if it makes you happy, I'm going to be pretty neutral on this front. We start off with the Flood, and these aren't exactly a galaxy-wide parasite, but they do crop up all over the place. The first time I saw these guys in-game would have been Cage 3, so I am a bit more used to seeing the blue colour. It's the first one I saw. But as far as the purple one goes, it's a very simple recolor. We've just got a blue shade to a purple shade, and the little antenna bits go up to pink instead of a lighter blue. I can't really criticize it. I think it's perfectly fine, Maybe I could say the red eyes stand out a little more on the blue than they do on the purple. But come on, it's just purple. It's blue to purple. What can I say about this? The Flood supposedly represent irritation. This is the only time that it was explicitly stated to us what the emotion represented was supposed to be for one of these guys. So for all the other Unversed, we just kind of have to infer what they're supposed to be. But this one makes sense with irritation. They kind of scamp about and they can't keep still and they look like they're itchy or something. So yeah, it makes sense. Next up we have the Scrapper, and as you can see, the picture of the final mix version is from the journal. But this is the Scrapper. These guys are true to their name, they like getting into scraps. They got these big clawed hands, kind of the soldier Heartless for the Unversed, I suppose. This one's gone from blue to green, another very simple recolor, and it keeps the shading. As you can see, the feet are darker and the ends of the claws. It sticks with the original design, it's just a different color. So again, actually I'm quite happy with this one. I think the green looks quite nice. It's a nice shade of green. So yeah, it's not too bad at all. Let's cruise on over to the Bruiser. It's a big old brute, this one. Yeah, so this is actually the last of a little bit of a trio of blue Unversed in the original. We had the Flood, the Scrapper, and now the Bruiser, and they've all kept this blue scheme. So you could argue that's one thing that is lost in the final mix, with these three all being different colours now. That could be a pro or a con. We've got more variety, purple, green, and burgundy, but we have less cohesion between them, so I suppose that's down to personal preference. I think I do slightly prefer this blue Bruiser over the burgundy one, but the recolor isn't ugly by any means. The gold works well with that reddish tone, and they've kept the midsection dark, and in fact the whole colour is on the darker end of the spectrum, so it keeps to the more brutish style of this Unversed. The Bruisers are a bit of a stand-in for large bodies, however you don't have to attack them from the back. Until they put their armour on. Here's the Buckle Bruiser. This guy you have to attack from the back or use magic on. As you can see, it's an armoured version of the Bruiser. The colour scheme is a little deeper than previously, and it's got these obvious buckles, as well as a nice plume helmet, which is very fitting for Olympus Coliseum. The recolor dons some very vibrant red armour. I have to say, the red and silver is actually quite a good look. I wouldn't say this is a downgrade of a recolor, and hey, the face is actually the same. And then finally in the Bruiser family is the Wild Bruiser, which you encounter in Neverland. They've got these cuffs on, there's no chain, but perhaps it's like the genie and they're still not quite free. You could even say they need an ape escape. It's interesting, I think the final mix version kind of looks like the original version, say if it was Cage 1 Heartless. That more muted grey and blue scheme would seem like the original, but no, it's actually this light red that's the original. The Unversed, so far, they haven't really changed them too much. They've just swapped the colours around, but not really made them too different and changed the whole design aesthetic of them, which I do appreciate, but we'll see if that's held to as time goes on. And here we have the first of some magic related Unversed, because we always need enemies like this in these games. This is the Red Hot Chilli, and it got a recolor, which seems very strange, doesn't it? Why would an Unversed like this get a recolor? Well, it's not much of a recolor, it's still reddish in tone, but you can see the difference here is it's got a black main body and then it's got orange on the bottom rather than black on the bottom. I kind of prefer the original, I have to say. The one thing is maybe the red eyes on red is a bit strange, so I can see maybe why you could say, hey, the new version makes more sense with the eyes, but still, I think the original actually looks red hot, whereas the new one with the orange fading to almost yellow at the bottom, it doesn't have quite the same punchy effect, you know? It's a strange choice to recolor this. It's not different enough to really make a difference, and you're like, oh, that's crazy, you know, it's not like they've changed it to blue or something. It still needs to be a reddish tone, otherwise it won't make sense. But then you think, well, why do it anyway? Why do it at all? I don't know. They didn't really do it with the KH1 Heartless, like, you know, like with the yellow operas and red nocturnes. They didn't recolor those, but they did with these. Well, if you don't really like rock bands, how about some blues instead? This is the blue sea salt, because Kingdom Hearts' obsession with sea salt will never end. This one got recolored as well, but it actually adds more blue if anything. You see, the main body is still blue, but it graduates down to a lighter kind of cyan, and instead of black at the bottom we have a very light, more sky blue thing going on. So, hey, it's fine. I guess I still prefer the original a bit, just because it would match with the red hot chili a bit more, but this one's not so bad. And then if you're going to have fire and blizzard, you've got to have thunder as well. It's the classic trio. This is the yellow mustard, which is definitely the least appetizing sounding one of the three, but also it got the least amount of change. You can see there is something different here. We have a graduation of colour, from a pale yellow down to an orange, and at the bottom it's grey rather than brown. But it's so barely different. I mean, again, I have to wonder what the point of recoloring this was, but it's there anyway, and you probably wouldn't even notice it if you played both versions of the game. Wow, the prize pod actually has a good looking picture. That's pretty crazy. This little gimmicky Unversed, he went from a purple and black scheme to a greenish, some weird sort of green, and gold and grey. I do prefer the purple and black, I think it's just cooler looking, but I will admit that it's maybe a bit too Heartless-esque. Like if you give this thing some beady little yellow eyes, it would just be straight up a Heartless, right? So maybe the new version actually is a bit more fitting for distinguishing itself more from a Heartless look, but I still think the original looks cooler. We also have another recolor. Oh yes, this is the Ringer. This is a Final Mix exclusive special Unversed, a bit like the special Heartless from KH1. You have to do some assorted, kind of minigame-like tasks to defeat these guys and get a high score. This one's just a prize pod that's yellow and blue and red, and you know, the colours are all a bit bright and not particularly matching, so I don't really care for the design of this. The Ringer name apparently is because it makes a ring noise when you correctly get the right one, because it kind of, it's got one of those you have to guess which one it is challenges. But I'd also say, because it clones itself, it could also be Dead Ringer, which means, you know, like the exact copy of. So I think this could be a bit of a double pun here. And then we have the Monotrucker. Well, this guy, as you can see, he's on a motorized kind of dish. I guess it's like a wheelbarrow thing. That's where truck comes from. And then he's got one wheel. That's where mono comes from. The recolor of this, I might actually like it a little bit more. You know, I think both versions kind of just go for, hey, here's a bunch of colors, right? We've got a lamp, we've got the pickaxes, and then we got the truck thing he's on. And they're all different colors. But I think the recolor, I guess I like the yellow lamp more because it makes me think of an actual miner's lamp a little bit more. And yeah, and then the base is blue. What am I even saying? Look, they're both basically the same. It's hard to have a preference when neither one really sticks with me too much. I do like the general design though, the shape, that's quite nice. It's a fairly unique looking thing. This funky dude is called a Thornbite, and you can see where that comes from. It's got these spiky plant appendages. What I like about the recolor here is they haven't changed the color of the appendages too much. It's a lighter green, yes, but it's still green. It still looks like a plant. I think that's really important. And the colors they've gone for the spinning top part, for example, it's gone for an earthy brown look, which is also quite fitting for it being a plant. So hey, not bad at all. One thing I don't understand is the name. The thorn part makes sense, but the bite, where does the bite come from? Does it bite? Is there like a sort of bite attack? From what I can tell, not really. I thought, is the spinning top something to do with this, right? Maybe there's a bite thing associated with the spinning top. So hey, if you got any ideas, you could type it in the comments below. Here is one of the strangest looking Unversed, to be honest. It's the Shoegazer. It is a shoe. It's a boot. I guess shoes do make a lot of sense for the Castle of Dreams, you know, Cinderella, glass slipper. Hey, that's fair enough. You can see the Unversed head peeking on the top of it, so I assume that's where gazer comes from, because it's kind of gazing out. But it's so strange to be fighting a bunch of boots. I know there was like the guard armor feet, the hammer legs, right? But I guess this is just something for all the weird enthusiasts out there. Hey, like all those people who want Aqua to step on them. How about Shoegazer can step on you instead? To be honest, they both look pretty decent, but if I was to choose one to actually wear myself, I don't really want to wear red shoes, you know. So that would have to be the original. Also, shoegaze is a genre of alt-rock. It's the first I've heard of that, but all I can say is 3, 2, 1, shoegaze. The boot fetish never ends. Well, here we have the Lone Runner. This is another one of those special final mix Unversed. Definitely the least fashionable of the boots though, it's yellow. It's called Lone Runner even though actually it's not alone, there's a lot of them and you have to take out as many as you can. There is a movie called Lone Runner, so yeah, there's that I guess. Spiderchest. Makes you think it's a normal chest. But yeah, it's like a mimic, right? You guys probably know mimics. Maybe from Final Fantasy, maybe from Dark Souls, maybe from the original D&D that it comes from. But it is essentially that. It's a chest that's not a chest that actually attacks you. Of course, we're stretching what a spider is, considering it doesn't have 8 limbs, but that's a classic enemy naming convention. When the chest is disguising itself, it just looks like any other chest in the world that it's in. But when it comes to life, it turns into one of these 2 colors depending on the version of the game. And then we have a final mix special variant of this called the Flame Box, which to me sounds like if you went to a fast food restaurant and you got some like spicy chicken order, the Flame Box. But yeah, it's purple. And it shoots fireballs you have to keep in the air. You know, just use magnet. Moving on, we have the Archravens, one of the more annoying Unversed in the game because they just love to fly up and out of the way of your attacks. One cool thing about these is you can find them quite a lot in Radiant Garden. And what does Radiant Garden turn into? Hollow Bastion. And what do we find in Hollow Bastion? The Wyvern Heartless. So there's a bit of a common theme there, makes sense, right? Castles, ravens, wyverns, it all goes together. The recolor of this, I don't really like it as much, it's fine. It gives it a bit of a greenish tone, but I prefer the black, the silver, the red. I think that's just a bit more striking. Oh, and with this Unversed, you could even say it's floaty. Then here we have the Hareraiser, and I've got to say, when these enemies get named, someone's clearly enjoying the puns they can make. Hareraiser, you know, something's hair-raising, but this is like a rabbit or a hare, so it's Hareraiser. Oh, it's wonderful, isn't it? Well, the recolor here goes from black and pink to a white and turquoise. I quite like both of these. I do prefer the black and pink because it's darker and I just generally prefer dark looks, and I think these black looks do suit the Unversed quite well in their theming. But the new one's good as well. I think that turquoise was a very good choice to go with the white. And again, it's not over the top. The colours make sense. This is why I think a lot of these Unversed designs are actually quite decent. The Jellyshades look absolutely pissed off. I think it's because of the dot on the Unversed eye. It looks more like an actual eye, so it really gives this annoyed expression, which I always find quite funny. But yes, even these guys got recolored. We have a 4 for the price of 1 here. Originally we got the blue and the brown, and the greenish one with the blue, and then the orange and red, and then the blue and the pink. And then we go to, I'd say probably a more simple scheme with the final mix. Red and white, blue and cyan kind of thing, pink, and then green and orange. Like, actually, oh, you know, maybe it's another one where I prefer the final mix just for a bit of consistency. But they're so simple that there's not really a whole lot of choosing to do here. What's your favourite Jellyshade, everybody? I quite like the red and white one, personally. Here's an enemy that I'm surprised by the name of. It's Tank Toppler. Yes, it has a valve and it fills with a gas, I assume steam, that would fit with Radiant Garden's watery, pipey plumbing theme. You're supposed to hit them from behind, otherwise they get too inflated and start rolling at you and you can't defeat them properly. You can probably guess which one I prefer out of these two. I like black and red, it's always a really cool colour scheme. But the valve actually stays gold, maybe just a little bit more muted, maybe a little more bronzy on the final mix. The Japanese name for these guys is Irritable Tank, which kind of sounds like something from an MMO, you know, you've got an irritable tank in your team. Maybe they keep ranting at the healers or something. There's a final mix special version of this called the Belly Balloon. It's mostly purple. I'm sorry the quality isn't always the best on these. It's very crispy, I know, but I think you can see the colours well enough. It's the same shape. This one in Japanese is called Diet Tank, but I tend to prefer Tank Zero. Vial Phial is next. That's a fun name to say, isn't it? Vial Phial. The original colours of this are purple and silver, and then in the final mix we have a deep green and silver, plus an orange crystal on top. This guy heals other Unversed and it can poison you, so these colours all make sense. The purple fits the poison aspect pretty well, and the green, I suppose that does fit that as well, but also the green can represent a healing factor. I'm not so sold on the orange top, but I do think both the designs work pretty well. Then there's a special version of this called Vitality Vial. With this one the gimmick is you have to survive as long as possible. I don't really like the design of this as much as the previous two. It's just quite light coloured, I don't think it fits what this thing does quite so well. Sonic Blaster is about the most generic sci-fi weapon name you could come up with, isn't it? But here we have an Unversed that's named this. You find this mostly in the deep space world, of course. It switches between two different modes, the Seek mode, where it's got more of a happy expression, and then it flips upside down, and you get the, well, I suppose, Destroy mode, where it's more angry, and it's got an actual attack device instead of this radar dish. I think this is quite an interesting design. It's reminiscent of the Trick Ghost, but yeah, it looks really cool. I prefer the silver and blue because I think it fits the aesthetic of the world better than the red, so I'll go with the original design on this one. Triple Wrecker might be one of my favourite Unversed designs. It's quite simple what it is at a glance, a totem pole, but there's a lot of cool detail in here. Let's just run through them. We've got an ice, a fire, and a thunder section. 3 different Unversed really. They're all stacked on top of each other, and they switch around in 3 different orientations. Whatever's in the middle is the one that's going to be leading the attacks. But it's really in the design of each individual that I like. The colours obviously make sense. Blue for ice, red for fire, yellow for thunder. That's how it is in Kingdom Hearts. But it's not just the colours, it's the shapes as well. If you look at the blue one, it's got this quite crystalline shape. These pointed edges suits ice very well. The fire section is more curvy, which makes you think of flames, and then the thunder section is very jagged like lightning bolts. Pretty cleverly done, I have to say. Although I don't really like the blue on the thunder one at the bottom, so I might actually prefer the remix's thunder section. However, I still prefer the originals for the other 2 parts. Oh yeah, I haven't really talked about the Unversed eyes that much, because they speak for themselves, I think. But here's a good example of it, right? The ice section has some sort of sorrowful eyes curving downwards. Then on the fire one we have curving upwards, gives it more of an angry look. And finally on the thunder, it's curving from the top downwards, which gives it a sort of happy, excitable look. And you can see these designs on all the Unversed and get a general feel of the emotion of them. There's a special version of this too called the Element Cluster, and it makes me think of Mickey's Keyblade, Star Cluster and Elemental Encoder in Cage 3. What the hell? BBS predicted Cage 3? That's crazy. Well, anyway, this one just goes wacky with the colours, doesn't care. You know, the ice one has a bit of pink going on, we got brown on the fire, and then blue lightning bolt sides on the thunder, which I guess makes sense because lightning actually is blue. But obviously I don't like this as much because it always starts to get a bit muddled. But since this is a special Unversed, it doesn't affect the original or anything like that, so it's not really a big deal. Oh, would you look at that? It's the most annoying enemy in the game, the Mandrake. Oh, I hate these little things. The way they don't despawn, they just sit, especially in that Radiant Gardens area. They just sit there and throw things at you and don't despawn. And I was just like, oh, you irritating little creatures. Of course, Mandrake comes from Mandragora. It's a real life thing, it's a root, as well as being a typical fantasy monster, Final Fantasy again, but also you may know Harry Potter Mandrake's probably the most famous use of them. These don't scream quite as much, but yeah, they are irritating. Oh, and I prefer the original green one, I think it just makes more sense as a plant. Little side note here by the way, these obviously fit Radiant Garden because of the gardens. The Thornbites are also a plant-based Unversed, and they fit some of the early ones because of them being set in forests quite a lot of the time, right? Most of the Unversed fit the surroundings in some way other than the very basic ones, but I don't think I really need to go through all of them. You know, the Monotrucker, it's in Dwarf Woodlands because it's a miner type Unversed. The dwarves are miners. Yeah, it's pretty obvious I think where it comes from. Anyway, I better get back on track here. We also have the Floating Flora, a special version of the Mandrake which is predominantly purple. There's a bit of a theme where some of these Final Mix special Unversed have purple as their colours. This one's colours are a bit ugly to me, but I gotta say, the Mandrakes, they're pretty thick, you know? Next up is the Chrono Twister. This is an hourglass shape, with the Unversed's head floating around inside. You can see him peeking out of the sand there. It's a pretty interesting design. The sand runs down and when it finishes, it casts stop. Then it will turn over and the sand will run down again, which means that the head can be either in the bottom or the top, as you can see here. The Final Mix version changes the main colour to turquoise, and the sand is now a groovy purple. Now this one is very simple. The axe flapper, which gets its name from its wings coming out of its head. Once again we have these ears being the appendages, but then also it's got an axe shape as a head. That's pretty much it. It's kind of like a Heartless in that it changes from a blue to a red. Something like the rabid dog from Cage 2 had a similar change. Here's a fun one to say, Blobmob. Blobmob. You're a funny looking thing, aren't you? This vaguely jellyfish shaped thing, it can split itself into two when you kill it, and then those two can also split themselves into two, and then those four can split themselves into two, which leaves you with 8 tiny ones. This guy did get a recolor, going from blue and green to white and red. I do like both of these, but white and red is a color scheme that I'm a bit of a fan of, so I'd maybe have a slight preference for the final mix here. Then there's also a special variant of this called the Gluttonous Goo. Guess what? We got purple again. Not just purple, there's some orange there, yellow, blue. There's a few too many colours for my liking, but there it is. One other thing we can use the Blobmob and Gluttonous Goo as an example for is the eyes matching up to the shape. It's kind of like that Boober Kiki thing, right? Usually people say Boober is the soft shape and Kiki is the edged shape. And on a similar note, the rounded Unversed, they tend to have a more passive expression. They don't look as dangerous. Whereas the more angular Unversed, they tend to have an angry expression. They look more threatening. And the last of the regular Unversed is the Glidewinder. There's 3 different colours of this. Red, blue, and yellow, of course. The colour change here is a bit like with those food Unversed. You see, originally, the front colour is the predominant one, but in the final mix they kind of swap it around, so it's black or grey on the front, and then the colours more on the secondary parts. Again, I don't really think there was much point in doing this, and I kind of prefer them as they were. I think also the key on the top, I don't really like, for example, how there's a green key on the yellow Glidewinder. I just think the original designs are a little bit slicker. As for the name, well, it's a pun on Sidewinder, of course. The glide is there because they sort of hover along, float along the track. And yeah, you find these on the race courses. And then the winder, well, you can see they've got wind-up keys in the top, but you could also say that they wind their way around the track. So there's a lot of things going on with his name. And now onwards to the Unversed bosses. First we have Wheel Master, which is one of the strangest Unversed designs, honestly one of the strangest boss designs in the series. I mean, look at this thing. It's pretty obvious what it is. It's a spinning wheel, Sleeping Beauty, spinning wheel, but I quite like it. I don't always want to fight humanoid enemies, sometimes I just want to fight some weird gangly limb thing like this. The original version had a red and black, very Unversed style colour scheme, and then the new one is white, yellow and blue. The other Unversed master we have is the Symphony Master. This guy's got quite the drip, don't you think? That's what people are saying right now. That's what the Zoomers are saying, drip. I don't really get it. I'm an old man. Anyway, this is a really cool boss design-wise. I've always enjoyed it. It's quite humanoid, so definitely a departure from the Wheelmaster. But the colours and the design, it's pretty fabulous. But I really like the colours on both versions, actually. I think the shade of pink and the shade of green, they're both very nice. Slightly prefer the pink, but I will say about the final mix version, I really like those black and white leg pieces. I have no idea what that's called, but I quite like how they've done a black and white thing there. I think that's a little more interesting. Even the instruments got colour changes, although they're pretty sensible, they're not anything crazy. It is one of my favourite Unversed designs in this game. Hey look, I even like how he's got what looks like headphones perhaps, but these are earpieces that he has, are these quavers. I mean, come on, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Cursed Coach is next, and this is quite obvious. It's Cinderella's pumpkin carriage, but corrupted. It's a pretty simple design, but I like it, it's quite effective, and it's a cool thing to fight. Now the final mix, it changes the main body of the carriage to blue, which is maybe a little strange because orange, sort of brown, definitely fits a pumpkin better. You could say though that blue represents the corrupted nature of it, so I can definitely see a case for this existing. I will still cast my vote to the original, I think, but I don't mind the blue one. The wiki says it bears some resemblance to the carriage in Cinderella 3 A Twist in Time, so that's the second time I brought up that movie in one of my videos and I still haven't watched it, but apparently it's actually quite good. Some people say it's even better than the first one, so I feel a bit bad for using it as a mocking example last time I mentioned it. Should have used the second film instead, huh? If the Wheel Master and the Symphony Master are kind of a duo, then I'd say the Cursed Coach and the Mad Treant are also a duo. They're both these savage, sinister, corrupted, jagged mouth Unversed bosses. This one is a tree and it's based on the spooky trees from Snow White. Oh, and of course the Treant is a classic fantasy creature. You could also say Ent. And it's a similar case to the Cursed Coach because the original design is quite typical. It's a brown tree with green leaves. but the new design turns the tree to black and gives it these orangey brown leaves instead. So it's made the whole thing a bit darker, perhaps more sinister? I don't know, I'll leave that one up to you. Remember guard armor from KH1? Remember how it went from mostly dark colours to a silver and multicolored thing, and I hated it? I still do. A lot of people say it looked like a Gundam, but I don't care, it just looks ugly to me. Well, here we have the spiritual successor in Unversed form, the Trinity Armor. Like the guard armor, it can split into 3 pieces, although this one takes itself a bit more seriously, and I think that's evident in the recolor as well. We've gone from dark colours, black and red, with little highlights of gold and blue, to these lighter colours with silver, a fairly dark blue, and red and gold highlights. But honestly, this is actually a pretty decent recolor. Now, I hadn't seen the original before, this is the first time I'm looking at it, and I have to say, I love those dark colours, so I think I would still prefer the original. But the new one, you could say perhaps it does fit a little better in Radiant Garden, since that's quite a light world. I think this could really just be down to personal choice, because I think it's not a bad recolor, and I think it does the silver armor look a lot better than guard armor did. Oh, and the parts are split into alpha, beta, and gamma. So where's the Sigma male armor? Oh, now this is a cool boss design, the Metamorphosis. It's like a ghost jellyfish. I like how its face looks like it's kind of glued onto the top. But there's not a lot to talk about with this one. I think it's a cool sci-fi looking thing, it very much fits deep space. The recolor generally darkens the creature a bit, so I don't mind that. I think both of them look quite cool. I realise the final mix picture I have for Mimic Master here isn't the best, but I think you can see the colours well enough. Now, this one looks like they just finished college, but they definitely did some plagiarism to achieve that, which is evidenced by how they copy you in the battle. The final mix version got some different graduation robes, and it's really hard for me to choose a preference with these. I don't know, purple and yellow, again, I'm not a huge fan of, but I still think the design overall is alright. It's a pretty unique idea for a boss design, I'll give it that, and it's another enemy in Kingdom Hearts that wields a book, because you gotta have lots of those. I suppose if Zexion had his own Lesser Nobody, it might look a bit like this, just more silvery grey and without the eyes. Alright, here's our last recolor, the Iron Imprisoner, and sadly, it suffers from the final mix recolor curse. I don't like this one at all. I think it goes from actually looking like iron, with grey and black, it looks like metal, and the red chains and blue cuffs are a nice little punctuation of colour. But the final mix version is purple and yellow and green, and it's all just... it just takes away from the look of the Iron Imprisoner. I think it just looks a lot less cool. So it's a bit of a shame that the last one we're looking at is an unfortunate recolor. Still, might as well quickly go over the other variants. The Iron Imprisoner 2, he breaks free of his chains, although his legs are still locked up. And he gains this cool new hammer. I like this weapon. The Iron Imprisoner 3, his legs are now free. That rhymed, kind of. But yeah, his legs are free and he gets to move around. He's still got the manacles on though, so that brings us to the Iron Imprisoner 4. Now we get some slightly different colours on the hands and feet because he doesn't have the manacles. I think the final mix version looks best here because there's less yellow. You know how I feel about yellow and purple? Without so much yellow other than a little bit on the hammer, I think it does improve slightly. But still, you can't go wrong with grey and red, it just looks badass. There's a couple of extra Unversed bosses that obviously didn't get a recolor because of their nature. The Spirit of the Magic Mirror gets turned into an Unversed by the Queen using a potion. It's a pretty cool boss fight visually. Fighting it twice is a bit much, but I still enjoy the boss fight for what it is. And then there's the Vanitas Remnant, just what's left of Vanitas in an Unversed form. Kind of like the Lingering Will, you fight it in the same place, and it's all of the remnants of the being that it once was. Just this is an Unversed rather than an armor. And I like it visually, turning the red and black to white and black still looks very cool. I think any colours would look cool on Vanitas pretty much, although it'd be quite funny to see him in pink. And that concludes it, that's all of the Unversed in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. As you may have been able to tell, I don't feel so strongly for the original designs here, so I can be maybe a bit more impartial, although I think it's not just because of that. I think a lot of the recolors are done better than some of the Heartless were done, so there is that. And of course there's still a couple of unfortunate cases, like the Iron Imprisoner. But what do you think about the BBS Unversed generally? What do you think about the recolors? What's some of your favourites and least favourites? Let me know in the comments down below. And thanks for watching. I'll be doing a Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep Keyblades video at some point, hopefully fairly soon. So maybe see you then. Cheers.